Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and get on with the Q&A panel section of the talk. For those of you watching on YouTube and Facebook, please drop your questions in the chats for Facebook and YouTube, and we'll be collecting them up and asking them during the second part of the question and answer period. For the first part, if anyone has any questions, just go ahead and raise your hand. It looks like we have Barisha. You already have a question? You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, I want to thank this panel. This was absolutely excellent. This has been great. Thank you, Pamela Price, Chesa Boudin. I'm so glad you were elected. And I was a criminal justice major at San Francisco State University. And we were talking about this history and this policy during my time there. So I'm super proud. It was a super left progressive program. And my question is, how do we get an independent police oversight commission in Alameda County, similar to what's happened in Oakland? I know Assembly Bill 1185 was presented to the legislature. The purpose of the bill was to authorize the county to establish a sheriff oversight board, either by action of the Board of Supervisors or through a vote of county residents. And the bill will authorize sheriff oversight to issue a subpoena when deemed necessary to investigate a matter within the jurisdiction of the board. The bill would have authorized the county to establish office of the Inspector General to assist with the board in its supervisional duties. Now that bill did not pass. It was placed in inactive status, but is there another way to go about establishing an oversight commission for Alameda County, over the Alameda County Sheriff?
Is that directed at any of the speakers or just anyone in general?
Anyone who would like to answer the question.
Sure.
Sure. I'll start since I'm in Alameda County and hopefully bringing some policies and some change to Alameda County. And I think, thank you, Barisha, for that summary of the legislation. And it is unfortunate that some of the most forward thinking and basic protections that we try to get through the California legislature don't always happen. So the way to do it in Alameda County would be to do a countywide ordinance that we could model after the legislation, and we'd have to actually campaign and get it passed throughout the county. As you know, our Board of Supervisors has consistently abdicated their responsibility, their any ability to oversee the sheriff, even refusing to audit his budget, and turning a blind eye to the lawsuits and turning a blind eye to the deaths that we see inside Santa Rita County Jail. So as Chesa pointed out, it's the residents of California that have led the way, and it will have to be the residents of Alameda County that lead the way towards accountability for the sheriff. So thank you for the question.
Any other speakers want to answer that question?
Yeah, let's discuss Newport.
I might.
Oh, sorry, guys. Yeah, sorry. We have. Were you going to answer the question for the speakers, or do you want to ask a question?
I was just going to respond to the question.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah.
No, I agree absolutely with Pamela Price. It's going to have to be a ballot initiative that's written out correctly with the kinds of language to make the necessary corrections. The problem with that is on these COVID times, it'd be very difficult. But even when there's the freedom to move around, people don't really get involved in the process and get out to vote and educate people. I'm so thankful for the 4 panelists, the information you brought. I was on the 2nd Police Review Commission in the history of this country. I grew up in Rochester, New York, a city that had 2 police riots in the 60s. And we passed one of the first federal decrees of a federal court in police policy. I worked with Malcolm X to develop the Organization of Afro-American Unity. I came through other things, but even when I was in Mayor of Berkeley, it was right after Prop 13 got passed. and we knew when we looked at the police department, the budget was 60%. We reorganized our police department, but I had to call on national organizations to come. And we happen to think that because we're so-called from a progressive place, black, white, whatever else, that we got all the answers. But I can tell you, I now live in Oakland. I'm on the Reimaging Commission. Oakland is as screwed up as any place in the world. You got the Reimaging Commission, you got a Police Review Commission, you got the Department of Violence Prevention, all this. All these things are individualized. There's no system of sorts. We don't have the depth of information, which some of you go out to us and to inform us what to do. So we think things are getting better. Oakland's been under a decree from the federal government, Felton Henderson, for 17 years, and nothing's corrected up. The police department in Oakland was founded during the Republican days before Lionel Wilson was elected, when you went down and we brought white supremacists from Mississippi and places like that during that step. People don't understand the history. You can't correct things without knowing the history in order to inform the policies and this and that. So I am so glad for the speakers that we had, and we need more of that to assist us.
Yes, we definitely do. Knowledge is always very useful. Antoine, I think I saw your hand up next.
If I can make a comment, I
Oh.
agree with what I've heard from the responses of Mayor Newport and Attorney Price. And we also need to consider who should be our next sheriff in Alameda County. Thank you.
Yes, I just want to thank the panelists, Chaser, Pam, a lot of people on this panelist. I'm from Crocker Professor County, and I see Gail McLaughlin and my brother Williams on the other line. Our sheriff is trying to open up another prison and take and I also sit on the board of alcohol and other drugs for the last 10 years for the county. And I'm the founder of Men and Women of Purpose, the first Black reentry program that went into the Crocker County correction facility and brought programs inside out. So I know firsthand on what I'm a reentry professional, expert, or however you want to call it. And if you have a problem if you have a solution to the problem, you're a problem to the money. And some of these individuals don't want to see people get well because that's how they get paid because they're sick. And what I found out is that our people suffer through real vicarious trauma, and the war on drugs did a whole ripple effect for 35 years to the Black community that people don't even understand. I am a product and I survived it, so I know firsthand. So I'm not just talking about some book work. I'm talking about lived experience. And so going into the jails and dealing with the population that a lot of individuals that I know, their family members, and dealing with them with the domestic violence, anger management, these things that they really needed. The substance abuse was on the #1 tilt of everybody else, of all the individuals' crimes. It was substance abuse, then mental health sometimes, most of the time. But kind of both of them sitting on the board where I said it, it's like they 50-50. Mental health and substance abuse come hand in hand. So if they don't get their medication, they self-medicate. But doing the work that I've done and listening to y'all, on this panel, man, it's like for me, I'm still doing the work. I'm still going on reentry forums and speak and do my part politically to change these things, and also with my board. But this is to Gail and Mr. Willis that's on this phone. I really hope that you don't support the jail expansion and do everything to help me not to have that expansion open up at West County Jail, because we need that money outside services in our community. There's no reason a person has to be incarcerated to get mental health and substance abuse services. So if anybody else can chime in on what I've said, I really appreciate it, because like I said, I've been doing this work, and in these areas, those what you have to focus on with the assessments that is being done on these participants. I don't call them inmates, I call them participants, because they participate in their success so they can get a second chance at a first-class life. Thank you.
Yeah, great. I think, Gail, you were up next, so you can ask a question and answer Antoine, too. All right, can you unmute yourself? Let's see.
Okay, hi. Yes, first of all, just to answer Antoine's question, I most definitely oppose the expansion of the prison. I mean, it's ridiculous that we should even have to fight this, but we do, and we will, and we'll build that movement. We built movements to oppose expansions of prisons in the past, and we'll do it again. So thank you to East Bay, Our Revolution, for all your work, and thank you to all the wonderful speakers. So much of what you spoke to intersects with the work that we have done. And well, first of all, it intersects with the problems that developed in Richmond, the history, and also so many of the solutions that we have been able to put forward in terms of reentry programs, but also more solutions that we're working on. So I'm a Richmond City Council member and the former mayor of Richmond, and I'm pleased to be on here with all of you. And I have a question for San Francisco DA Chesa Bodine. It's great to see you again, Chesa. And here's my question. I know back in September 2020, you and others founded the Prosecutors Alliance of California, which is a progressive prosecutors alliance and the first in the nation of this kind of alliance. And I know the founders of this alliance included yourself and Contra Costa DA Diana Becton and LA DA George Gascon and San Joaquin County DA Tori Verber Salazar. So can you share some of the goals of this alliance? And I know a little bit about Assembly Member Banta's bill to cure conflict of interest among prosecutors who take police union money. So can you talk a bit about that as well as some of the overall goals of the alliance?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the question, Gail, and for your leadership and work. It's been great to see you and to work with you from across the Bay. Always a pleasure. I also, want to, and this dovetails with your question, Gail, but I want to go back to a point one of the previous speakers made. In San Francisco, we were talking about mental health and drug addiction in a previous comment. In San Francisco County Jail, 75% of people booked into the jail are drug addicted, mentally ill, or both. And the jail has become the #1 provider of behavioral health services in the city, more than the hospital, more than any other place. And so to your question, Gail, about what we're trying to do with the Prosecutors Alliance, we're trying to do a couple things. I mean, one thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we are a voice for law enforcement leadership advocating for treatment on demand, for safe consumption sites, for behavioral health treatment, not in cages, but with care in the community. And that means a number of things. It means lobbying in Sacramento. And look, we know that the California District Attorneys Association for decades has been a loud and aggressive voice for mass incarceration, for policies that have racially disparate impacts, that starve local communities of investments in areas that can actually prevent crime and keep families together and communities strong. And I want to be clear, I am a member of California District Attorneys Association as an elected DA. And I talk to the other people in that organization and I lobby them to try and make changes, but I'm in the minority. The bulk of the folks in that association are out here advocating for 3 strikes, advocating for money bail, advocating for increasing the number of felonies that are on the books. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a association that believed in reform and that had the credibility and the experience of having implemented policies that promoted public safety without simply turning to incarceration. And so we engage in a number of things. You mentioned one of them, which is Rob Bonta's bill. We came up with an issue, something I initiated in partnership with the other DAs you mentioned, and we call it curing the conflict of interest. And what that means is we want district attorneys and district attorney candidates to be prohibited from accepting campaign donations from police unions. And I want to be clear, this is not about saying police unions, are denied their First Amendment rights or they can't, have a voice or vote or even spend political money. It has nothing to do with that. This is about a very narrow, specific issue, which is that if I am the district attorney of any county in this state, at some point during my 4-year term, I will be asked to investigate an officer's use of force or allegation of perjury or what have you. And that officer will belong to a union that more often than not will have made major contributions to my campaign. If it's not an actual conflict, it sure as heck is the appearance of a conflict, and the law has no room for that kind of thing. And so we asked the state bar and we asked the assembly to pass a law prohibiting the candidate. It has nothing to do with the union. It's about the candidate. If you want to be a candidate for office like this one, the one that I'm privileged to hold, you should agree to, you have to work closely with the police, but you have to be independent of them as well. And that means no political contributions directly from police unions. The other members of CDAA all oppose that. That's an area where CDAA said, no, we want to keep taking money from police. It doesn't create a conflict. It doesn't create a conflict, they said. And then you look at you look at the impunity, you look at the fact that throughout this country, almost every single elected district attorney has received money from police unions and has refused to prosecute cases like Ahmaud Arbery or like George Floyd. How much political pressure did it take before they filed those charges in George Floyd's case? It took a national, international uprising of righteous rage just to get them to do their dang job. Well, we've got to cure that conflict of interest. Those are some of the things we're doing in Prosecutors Alliance, Gail.
Thank you.
Okay, Melvin, looks like you're up next.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to the panelists. That was actually very informative. And actually to Antoine's question, no, I do not support the jail expansion. Actually, in 2017, we signed a letter from the city of Richmond, all of us, stating that we didn't support the jail expansion. And actually tune into the County Board of Supervisors meeting this Tuesday because they're talking about Measure X money, which is $90 million. And the goal is to keep that away from the Sheriff's Department because he already has way too much money in his budget. So yeah, my name's Melvin Willis. I'm a member of the Richmond City Council, reelected, and organizer with ACE, Racial Justice Coalition. I'm part of the RPA as well. And I guess I actually had a couple of questions from the great presentation that I had, and any way you look at it, it could be chopped up in two different ways. I guess the first question I have is because of COVID-19, and there's been a huge push on early release for those who are actually eligible for early release. And I know depending on your jurisdiction, there's monitoring happening. What are we doing seeing past this pandemic to make sure that we're not just perpetuating the criminal justice system by not just locking up everybody who was eligible for early release, but finding other programs to get them out of the criminal justice system? What kind of strategy or policy could be adopted? And also to, the professors and the folks that really broke down the history of criminalization, redlining, and slavery in this community, the Black community. I guess my question is what would be your advice at starting that narrative shift, as me being somebody who's African descent, but also talking to somebody who also grew up in the hood, but made it out and has a more tough on crime approach? How do we change that narrative in saying that poverty is more likely going to put you in a criminal justice system rather than just committing a crime? And thank you again for the presentation. It was great.
And just briefly say, we have a history, and this is a history deeply intertwined with the rise of punishment and the punishment state that we've talked about, of criminalizing poverty. And so to your point, I mean, that's exactly what we see. That's things like money bail that I'm proud to say we've ended in San Francisco. It's all about criminalizing poverty. The political pressure to prosecute people for being unhoused. Let me tell you, I was on the campaign trail in 2019, right? And the single most common question that I got as a district attorney candidate was, what are you going to do about the homeless? And, it's like, well, the city of San Francisco has a Department of Homelessness. They've got a $300 million budget. Why don't we ask them that question? We got to create housing for the homeless. That's what we got to do. We got to get people off the street and on their feet. That's what we got to do. Why would that be a question that people address to a law enforcement official? Why? It's not a crime to be poor. It's not a crime to be unhoused. It's not a crime to have nowhere to sleep other than a tent you set up somewhere. It's just not. It's not a crime, and I'm not going to prosecute it. But we have a system, and we have a mentality, and we have a culture that in many instances, especially people who are privileged and entitled, people who are wealthy, who say, I don't even want to see poverty. It makes me uncomfortable. It makes me feel unsafe. And my response is to call the police. And what we've seen in San Francisco is that when we created a non-emergency police hotline so that people who had issues with tent encampments or with unhoused individuals in our community wanted to reach out to the city and ask for, whether it be, cleaning services on the streets, because sometimes people don't have access to public toilets, what have you, that when the city sent anybody other than police, a lot of folks were unhappy. They wanted police to come and respond. And so they started changing the nature of the reports that they were making. They started saying they were seeing violent behavior. In many instances, no evidence, video footage would show, just invented, right? There is a desire by many people to have poverty just washed away without doing the work of helping to lift people out of poverty, without paying the taxes needed to invest in infrastructure or community services or training, right? So to your question, Melvin, absolutely, the problems of poverty and mass incarceration are deeply intertwined. And it's not just that we lock up poor people across the country. It's that locking people up throws their families into poverty, right? You said young men to prison, and who's paying the bills? Who's keeping the lights on? Who's helping to put kids into school? Who's earning the money? Then you got single mothers or single fathers at home. And that dooms an entire next generation to poverty and puts them at greater risk of being over-policed and incarcerated themselves. We've got to break the cycle.
Great. Dr. Ware, did you give any thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in briefly on the last part of the question about the response from our community, and it connects to what Brother Chase had said about breaking the cycle. So my father was a locksmith with a 6th grade education, who was homeless for almost 30 years of his life as he was slowly drinking himself to death. And when I was a kid in DC, walking around with my nose in a book, I was accused of acting white. Okay. The culture that we are embedded in is one that needs transformation. And some of the resources that are going towards incarceration need to be moving towards efforts that are actually going to revolutionize the culture through changes in the way that we understand our positioning. I'll give you an example in a concrete way of what I'm talking about. I'm involved with a program at UCSB called the Underground Scholars Program, which is a program for formerly incarcerated students who are enrolled at UCSB. And we do every other Friday a program called Freedom Writers, okay? WRITERS, looking at all the ways in which the documentary practices of this carceral state have taken away our freedom at one level or another, with pieces of paper that were written down by judges or by slave purchasers, and trying to empower us to use writing practices to take our freedom back, to liberate ourselves. Those kinds of programs have no money in them. I literally fund parts of the programming with my own personal research account as a professor, because there's no budget for that. There's no cultural imperative that says that we need to be shaping knowledge practices in our own community that allow us to be thriving, successful, and responsible for our own lives. Some of us have to literally just invent that out of scratch while our families are ripped apart. While we're getting stopped 17 times in my 17th year by the police for driving while Black. Never ticketed. So that's where these resources need to be going, but we also need to understand that we can't wait for the politicians to do it. We have to take actions at every level throughout the community, throughout the culture, and it has to be a wide-ranging effort to kind of reclaim a different sense of personhood than the kind of personhood that is being constructed for us by the carceral state.
Yeah, Gus Newport, I would like to respond to what the doctor just said. The United States is 43rd in the world in literacy and education, 72nd in the world in healthcare. When we reorganized the police department in Berkeley, we recognized that we had to bring in mental health workers to help people who were homeless because Reagan had closed the mental health institutions. But we also recognized that we had to provide money that we were cutting from the police department to provide through nonprofits and whatever to help with upgrading the quality of education, job creation, and all those things. There used to be a time when the American cities had to create a general plan or a master plan every 5 to 20 years. You find me a city that has a master plan or a general plan that's created one in the last 30, 40, or 50 years. This doesn't exist anymore. You got city manager, former governments, this and that, but you can't have an operating system that's functional to raise the quality of life for all unless you got systems integrated, and that's planning, public works, transportation, education, all those kinds of things. And if we don't begin to go towards that, we're in a world of trouble, because I've been getting calls because I was a Martin Luther King fellow at MIT for a couple of years, and they've been calling me because of a project I did in Boston, talk about post this pandemic, we're going to have to reorganize all cities anyway. I mean, people who live in the suburbs who now come into the cities or who move into these market rate condos are not coming into those because they can virally participate through their work and such whatever else. So you got all these market rate condos going up downtown Berkeley and Oakland and other places, Richmond. You could make those into affordable housing, put solar panels on the roofs so that we could create energy in this net, put more money into our education system. The so-called great liberal University of California at Berkeley was getting ready to bust the Institute for Social Justice that was founded by Troy Duster, the grandson of Ida B. Wells. If it had not been for that institute that Troy did, that has educated so many people of color, especially Black PhDs and whatever else, I wouldn't have been able to get some of the public policy I did when I was mayor. He worked hand in hand with us instead. People, we got to open our eyes and grow. Smell the air. Recreate the economy. Develop a better environmental system so that there will be a future for the next generation, et cetera, whatever else. And I'll tell you, nothing could be better than helping those of us. I got out of politics. I got drafted. 8 years, Berkeley, the so-called most progressive place in the world. When I looked at the combination of white supremacists and neoliberals and all that bullshit, I said, let me get out of here. Politics to me was a sickening thing. I ain't gonna tell you some stories about some who are supposed to be so progressive, you know, in these places or whatever else, because if I do, they say, oh my God, Gus, why'd you reveal that? But I want you to know the truth. Thank you all for the information you gave and this and that. And we have to do this more often to really rebuild the city. Because I'll tell you, the politicians by themselves ain't got it. They don't have the capacity.
No, they do not. That's why we put these on, because we know they need the information, because we can watch them and see how badly they do.
Exactly. Can I
Dr.
jump?
Armour? Oh, I was going to, yeah, go ahead, Pamela.
I just want to jump in.
Real quick, Pam, I just need to jump off. I'm so sorry. I love the work you all are doing. It's great to see you. Have a great night. Stay safe. And Pam, always a pleasure. Jody, great to see you. Thank you all for the work. Stay strong.
Right.
Thanks a lot, Chesa.
Thank you, Chesa. Thank you. Just wanted to follow up on a point that Chesa made, and it's so important to recognize that we have absolutely criminalized poverty, and that is where we have to take what Dr. Armour talked about. I love that, the new moral conception. And we got to tell people, no, why are you asking me about what I'm going to do about homelessness? I'm not the mayor, okay? That's not my responsibility. I'm going to try to make sure homeless people do not end up in the criminal justice system and that I'm not incarcerating them. Hello, that's really what it's about. And to your point, it is so critical to Gus's point and the point that's made, the politicians are very limited. I talked about briefly the watershed legislation that was passed in 2018, but there were two things that did not pass that to me are so critical. One was in 2019, the California legislature refused to pass SB 144, which would have eliminated adult fines and fees in criminal courts, because we fundamentally criminalize poverty. We make people who are caught up in the criminal justice system pay for that system, and we disrupt the economic stability of Black and Brown communities through the criminal justice system. And so that legislation did not pass. Another piece of legislation which did pass, but which was vetoed in 2020 by the governor, was SB 369, which would have established a reentry commission and made services for returning citizens a priority in this budget, a priority in the administration of criminal justice. And that bill was vetoed, as if, and the statement was that, oh, it's not really necessary. We don't really need that. Well, we do, because what the brother talked about is that how many of the reentry programs are being financed by individuals and by nonprofits. And the people who are getting millions of dollars through the state budget for incarceration are not spending and prioritizing reentry at all. And that has to change. So we have to push the politicians, and beyond what the politicians are willing to do, we've got to create at every level a powerful movement. And I look forward to our revolution taking this on, that we will talk about and change the whole idea that that is appropriate for us to criminalize and financially prey upon people in the criminal justice system.
Most definitely. We're going to do a little switch up here because Dr. Ware has to go soon. And so there's a very interesting audience question. So I want to jump to that. And then we're going to go back to and get Dr. Armour's insights for the last question, because we didn't get to hear that. And I wanted to hear that also. For Dr. Ware, from Michael, if the early slaves with abolitionist instinct thoughts were allowed to flourish, what do you think this society would look like today? For me, I guess it would be Wakanda, but that was just me.
Jay coming with the heat. Now that's it's a beautiful question. The truth is that we had actually a partial answer to that. The partial answer to that was Saint-Domingue, Haiti. Which in its early years, what the first free republic in the Western Hemisphere, many of the leaders of that, and the first one to abolish the institution of slavery here in the Western Hemisphere. 1791, this happens, and you see the beginnings of a free and flourishing economy. Also, a very powerful state in the works that is able to defeat the French army, which is the most powerful imperial force on the planet at that point in time. Because of those enslaved Africans earning their freedom, they ended the imperial designs of France, which led directly to the Louisiana Purchase. That's what allowed Jefferson to buy it cheap, was that the French basically had to sell off their interest. And so one of the things that I tell California students right off the top is that when y'all are partying in Isla Vista, pour some out for those Africans that got you California. By refusing to submit to slavery and struggling for their freedom. But how did Jefferson, who made that Louisiana Purchase, repay those enslaved Africans who gave him his most signal accomplishment of his presidency? With an embargo that turned it into the most impoverished nation in the Western Hemisphere within a 30-year period. So the issue is that even had we been able to get our freedom and continue along those kinds of trajectories, the broader systems of white supremacy, the broader systems of racial and economic marginalization were still coming to bear on us. That's why we're still engaged in the struggle today. And that's why we have to perceive this as the continuation of that struggle against white supremacy, against the capitalist commodification of human life itself. That is what was at stake in our enslavement. That is what is at stake today. That is the reason why people around the world responded to the Floyd uprising, because they understood that if Black people can get free in the belly of the beast, then everybody gets free.
Wonderful. Dr. Armour, I wanted to go back to you for the other question to see if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, the last part of the question was, and I thought it was a good one. What about someone who is from a truly disadvantaged Black background, someone from a dark ghetto themselves, who says, I've maintained a morally spotless record, or at least criminally spotless, right? And that shows you that you can avoid criminal wrongdoing coming from disadvantaged circumstances. Right, and that's what I heard the question being, and it's one that you used to hear all the time, and you're going to hear a lot, from now on out. People say, well, do we want to blame crime on criminogenic conditions like crumbling schools or hunger or lack of jobs or lack of adequate housing, or do we want to blame it on people's internal moral failings, their deficient character, right? And both when it comes to crime and poverty, we have a tradition in this country of explaining both crime and poverty as a reflection of people's inner deficiencies, their character deficiencies, not the external factors that they're facing. You really saw this first in the poverty setting, in the kind of economic setting, in a book called The Other America, in the early 60s by Michael Harrington. He was otherwise viewed as a liberal. He came out with, he discovered in The Other America, poor Americans in the early 60s, right? 4 groups of poor Americans he discovered, right? And they were, elderly people, rural, a lot of people in rural America, Black folk, and Appalachians, I think were the 4 groups. He discovered poverty. And then he said, okay, good enough, people are starting to confront poverty. He came up with an explanation for it that has haunted us ever since. His explanation was, those people are poor because of their culture of poverty. If it wasn't for their culture of poverty, they wouldn't be mired in, hopelessness and economic want, right? You see the exact same arguments made in LA when it came to policing Skid Row. In 2006, they created the Safer Cities Initiative in LA, in which they put many new officers. They made downtown LA what we call the nickel here, which is the fiercest expression of structural violence in America, by the way. It's the largest concentration of homelessness folk in America, right down here, Skid Row, right, the nickel. They put more police on there than anywhere else in America, under the Safer Cities Initiative. And the idea was, we're going to solve the problem of poverty with the police. They were very explicit about it. We're going to crack down on the down and out for their own good. This is paternalistic policing, therapeutic policing, right? The idea is the reason they're poor is because of their internal deficiencies. They lack moral fiber, moral character, and a lot of other internal factors. And so they need to be sent to these mega shelters and put on these 12-step programs, essentially, that will repair their inner brokenness. And that is the solution to poverty, right? And we spent hundreds of millions of dollars in LA pursuing that wrong-headed policy. 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We just kept pouring money into cracking down on the down and out, pursuing the same wrong-headed approach to crime, to the poor that we did to the crime, and saying, no, it's all internal factors, not external. And so, yeah, part of the conceptual shift I'm talking about is that we need to fundamentally rethink how people turn to crime, not just because of internal depravity, but because of external factors like lack of jobs, and because they're stuck in criminogenic conditions. And that's the same reason that they're in poverty too. Not because of internal deficiencies again, but because of lack of adequate safety net support and other kinds of support.
Great. Okay, so we have one last question from Matthew. Go ahead, Matthew.
Actually, why don't you let one of the other speakers ask their question, like one of the audience members not on Zoom.
Okay, yeah, let's go ahead and we can. Is any other Q&A panelists have any more questions you want to ask? Looks like no. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the other questions. One of the questions is from Kabir. How can more justice be brought to the cannabis industry, which has a history of horrible racial injustice? Pamela, you want to try that one?
Sure. I mean, we know that the pre-cannabis industry, which has been, and it has been it's been a different kind of industry, but certainly the use, as the speakers have pointed out, the use of the war on drugs to incarcerate people and disenfranchise people that was specific and intentional, and has persisted even as we in California decriminalized marijuana. It has still continued, and it's part of what Dr. Armour was talking about and what Dr. Ware is talking about. The whole idea that is of our criminal justice system and our economic system is to essentially oppress, is based on white supremacy. And so any Black or brown person attempting to make an advance in any industry and attempting to turn around the way that particularly the war on drugs has been utilized and cannabis has been utilized, that is going to encounter resistance. Fundamentally, it's difficult to challenge it because of the way that it's embedded in there and the whole origin of the thing. So, moving forward, we've got to continue to look at how the war on drugs has harmed communities of color and what specific things can be done to ameliorate that harm, whether it's economic measures that need legislation, both locally and statewide, that needs to address the racial disparities and how licenses are granted and who gets to benefit from the cannabis industry as we move forward, as well as how we look at where are the people who were sentenced under the war on drugs and how do we get to them and make sure that we are actively using the mechanisms that now exist to resentence folks based on those crazy convictions and the racial disparities in prosecution.
Dr. Armour, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Certainly one way is, real equity in distributing the licenses. We're supposed to have something like that, a regulatory agency in LA to make sure that, they got licenses for everything from growing through retail and the other kinds of accessories that are associated with it, that a lot of those licenses were supposed to go to people who were bearing the brunt of the war on drugs, the marijuana war in particular, but the war on drugs, by making sure they went to people who served time for drug offenses, et cetera. So there was a lot of rhetoric to that effect and a lot of high hopes, and it didn't pan out. It fell flat in the actual delivery of that kind of equity in the cannabis, in the distribution of cannabis licenses here. So it's just evidence again that even once you win you think you've won the rhetorical battle to some extent and gotten a concession that this is the right thing to do, unless you are on them like hawks constantly, and even then you're not assured to make sure that they are going to follow through. A lot of times it won't happen.
Great. Any of our Q&A panelists have any thoughts on that question? Okay, cool. We'll go ahead and go to the next question. The next one is from Lisa. I think Tony Thurman wanted to tax businesses that profited from the prison industrial complex and take that tax and give it back to the communities for early childhood education. Does anyone know about this and thoughts on it? Pamela or Jody? I've never heard of it.
I hear you, look, I worry a little because a lot of Biden came out with an executive, order saying something about what he was going to do with private prisons. And, there was a lot of fanfare around that. And then, you know, of just a few colleagues recognize, and if you were part of this conversation for a long time, you recognize that private prisons aren't the reason we have the explosion in the prison population, the reason we got the new Jim Crow. It is public prisons. The vast majority of prisoners are in public prisons. Public prisons are for-profit prisons. There are a lot of lobbies for corrections officers and a lot of other people who see a lot of money in public corrections. So, you know, sometimes I think we gotta recognize that this problem is so broad. You know, we can talk about, well, you know, taxing businesses that profit from prisons, but they're also businesses that profit from environmental racism. There are businesses that profit from a lot of societal, you know, illnesses that and ills that we need to just confront directly. You know, we need to just say we need to cut down the footprint of prisons, period. We need to defund the police, you know, cut back on the things we call crimes, radically reduce prisons, move toward real abolition at a fundamental level. And so, yeah, I guess that would be my quick response to that. I'm not too sanguine on the prospect of us actually being able to hold those who are profiteering from the caging of human beings accountable financially.
I have to agree. I mean, the fact is that the state is the primary profiteer of our state prisons. Incarcerated people do engage in a number of economic activities. They earn between 8 and 37 cents an hour. They fight fires. They produce goods for the state to sell. They support the entire the entire foundation of incarceration is built on the people who are actually incarcerated. And then we use them as cheap labor, as essentially slave labor in the state of California. That's fundamentally, I mean, we don't need to tax private prisons. We need to decarcerate the prisons that we have. And it's the same at this county level. You'll see that as well. There's such a huge profit motive in the county facilities where people are being charged for being incarcerated. In California, we just eliminated, inmates were forced to make co-pays for medical and dental services. Inmates are forced to pay astronomical amounts for phone calls and services. So the state is clearly profiteering off of incarceration. And so that would need to be the focus. And not just the state, but as I say, the county as well.
You know, you all make me think of a couple other things, especially Dr. Armour. During the time I was mayor, I used to go up and visit Geronimo twice a month when he was in prison. And it was amazing to go visit Geronimo when they take you into the outer section where they bring people in to field people. In white, brown, yellow prisoners would all invite their relatives to come and meet Geronimo. Because Geronimo had such a personality of reorganizing and teaching and giving such an analysis. Now they should take that under consideration. Some of the people doing time are some of the greatest reorganizers that could upgrade the quality of life from a system standpoint, whatever else, and show you how to make these persons more fundamental people in the workforce, et cetera, whatever else, for which they could be let out much earlier, et cetera, whatever else. But of course, nobody examines that kind of stuff.
Any other thoughts from the Q&A panelists? Okay, great. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question.
Yes, I want to say, this is Antoine. When I founded the organization in Richmond, the history of Richmond, we were ran by the Cowboys, which was the police officers. They were murderers, they were embezzlers, they were doing all kind of crazy stuff. But they ran Richmond with a strong arm and a strong foot. And the Black community we feared them. And so when they were dismantled in the early 80s, early 80s, they were dismantled. And things in Richmond started changing a little bit. And so when and in the drug war, the fascist war we had here in the early 80s, late 80s and late 90s, we had the highest murder rate per capita in the United States of America in Richmond. And it kind of, my experience, when the reentry process came, and I saw the change in how it could better the community, because the parole officer, if you know how the system works, the parole officer was never always violating people for being with each other. I mean, when they sign to get out of jail, it's like the young man said, you know, it's just you're signing your life away, because they're going to dictate everything you do to violate you to go back to do another term. And so when the reentry process, we were so successful at Men and Women of Purpose, because we were out in the community, we had the connections with the union jobs, we were doing family unification, we were doing drug court, we were doing homeless court, giving people back their licenses and everything to be, you know, to get their lives back, to get jobs and things like that. But after I left, all that stopped, because they were just in the jail, you know, just doing the same thing everybody else was doing. And so now, you know, it's just, you know, when you have passion for this work for the people, they don't want passion and for the people. They want people who want passion for the money. I'm passionate for lives. I'm not passionate for money. You know, it's like working for the slave master, if you like that. I mean, that's how I look at it. But when you out here doing the work for the people, you're not working in that circle. You don't have that mindset. You want to see people get their lives back and their families back and get families reunified again. And so, you know, that's what my driving force is. That's why I come to panels like this, and I'm invited to speak at different things and recovery stuff like that. So to give people hope and know how to do it the right way. Thank you.
Thanks, Antoine. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next question, which is from Alachu. This is kind of a joke, but also has a salient point to it that we should talk about. Why do we still have jaywalking as a crime in this century? So I guess Dr. Armour and
we want to be able to profile people. We want to be able to selectively enforce the law, because we know that people are jaywalking all the time, constantly. You know, millions of people every day are jaywalking, all right? And so it's like a lot of crimes, you know. If you, outside my house here, you have one highway is called the 110. If you get on the 110, the speed limit is 55 miles an hour. Now, nobody on the 110 is doing 55 miles an hour if the traffic is moving. When I get on the 110, minimum is 65 miles an hour, 60, 65 miles. Everybody's doing, if you're doing 55, people are starting to blow their horns, right? But so everybody's breaking the law. Everybody's going up the highway doing 65 miles an hour or more. And so when a police officer pulls you over, let's say a police officer pulls you over and says, okay, you were doing 65, right? And you got to say, yeah, well, yeah, I was breaking the law. I can't argue I wasn't doing 65, but you can't, you still may have a problem if you say, but officer, the only motorists you're pulling over for doing 65 are Black, or a disproportionate number of them, like 70% of them are Black, you know? And you never get to that question a lot of times for a lot of people, because they'll just say, well, why were you breaking the law? You know, if you weren't breaking the law, you wouldn't have anything to complain about. No, the selective enforcement of the law is a separate harm. You know, in the old Soviet Union, they used to say, you know, we'll criminalize everything. And this was a misrepresentation of the Soviet Union, by the way. So when they were trying to describe fascist countries, and this was the wrong example, but criminalize everything, then selectively enforce the law, right? And that way you can always, you know, kind of channel, social engineer. Nobody can say, you know, they weren't breaking the law. You know, you have a lot of people on the right who used to say, comply or die. Why are all these people, these hashtags in the Black Lives Matter movement, Walter Scott, Eric Garner, comply or die, just comply with the law, you know, or die, you know, but they weren't saying that in DC a couple of weeks ago when you had that insurrection, right? And for the most part, there would have been a massacre. So yeah, that is just something that's everyday part of police enforcement in America.
Yeah, I saw a talk with a former cop that called it the messing with laws. Well, he used a different word instead of messing with. It starts with an F. But he's basically like, yeah, those are laws that cops have to mess with people whenever they want to. Pamela, did you have any thoughts? Oh, it looks like you're muted.
Yeah, no, I think Dr. Armour said it all. Thank you.
Great. So let's go ahead and check out the next question. Just 2 more questions after this. Lisa, with another question, how can we get the average citizen to understand the reimagining of these concepts? I am fairly aware of these ideals and values, but even I have to work to get to what is going on here. How can we create messaging to get the people to rise up for this justice reform?
For me, I think it is critical to bring the data to people's understanding, to talk over and over again. I have to always talk about how Black people are 5 times more likely to be stopped in Alameda County, how Black youth are 86% of all the juvenile felony arrests in Alameda County, how Black people in Oakland are 5 times more likely to be stopped by the police. I think the data is there and it's irrefutable. It reflects the everyday experience that most people don't have, white people don't have. And so you have to let them know constantly, this is what is happening. And that message has to get out there that there is a double standard and that double standard has so many consequences, whether it's being stopped arbitrarily under these ridiculous laws, to being incarcerated in the county jail, to being criminalized for your poverty, because understanding if you get arrested, you get stopped, you get arrested, you haven't committed a crime, but if you go to Santa Rita County Jail, you can't get out because they're gonna set bail, and people who can't get out because they don't have bail money, you could lose your house, you could lose your car, you could lose your kids. For women, we lose our children because we get criminalized in this way and we don't have the resources to fight the state. So then you take a plea deal because I need to get out, right? And now I've got a conviction that becomes the basis. Maybe it's not a felony the first time, but then it becomes the basis for another felony. I mean, it is a cycle that people have to understand step by step by step. You have to break it down to them and show them that it's real and how it undermines the whole fabric of the community. As we look at police violence in Alameda County, I often use Lonnie Ganier's analogy that Black people are the miner's canary. If we go into the mine, we die, okay? The miners used to send the canary in. If the canary went in and did not come back out, that meant the mine was messed up and mine was poison, toxic for everybody. Black people are the miner's canary in America. This system is toxic for everyone, and we are dying. And it needs to be a wake-up call for everybody in this country that this is not a system that serves people, that cares for people. It is not a just or humane system, and we have got to fix it. It's on us. The Wakandans are not coming.
That's true. Dr. Armour, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree that, data, facts matter a lot. One of the problems is people don't have a reliable common source of facts and data. We don't have, journalism is an important tool, right, for us to make sure the stories get out, the progress continues, but a lot of people are living in their hermetically sealed, little silos, their echo chambers when it comes to information sources, which is why you can have people in DC, talking about the election was a fraud. I mean, irrespective of whatever else you thought about what they were doing, how right or wrong it was, just the factual world, the reality they were living in had no evidence for it. It was not evidence that there were no judges who were agreeing them. There were no lawmakers, legislative chambers that came out. There was just no support for it. I know that some conspiracy theories can be true. Iran-Contra, the CIA, or COINTELPRO. So I'm not against the idea that there can be some skullduggery going on out here, but they had zero evidence. And so what was scary about that is it showed how we can't even start to talk about a common purpose without a common truth. And we can't get a common truth without reliable sources of data and facts, right? And we don't have that. You know, you have an MSNBC crowd, a Fox crowd, a CNN crowd. Nobody's talking to one another. The MSNBC crowd can be like Fox for the liberals. You know, they can get in their own echo chamber and talk about, for example, the Russians hijacked the election in 2016. You know, and Mueller is going to prove it. He didn't. It wasn't the Russians. It was America. That was us. You know, we put Trump in 2016, and 75 million of us voted for him again in 2020. He wasn't an aberration. That wasn't a Russian, plot that made those 75 million people vote for Trump. This is us. This is America. You know, we're deeply divided. It's a battle for the soul of the nation going on. And so, yeah, and it's around a lot of criminal justice reform. And so, yeah, when the question is, how do we make these changes? One is good data. The other, for me, I've been doing a lot with the arts. You know, I wrote a play, Race, Rap, and Redemption, brought in a lot of artists, asked, should we pour liquor for Stanley Tookie Williams, just been put to death by Arnold Schwarzenegger as the governor back then, and got the crowd of 1,100 students, faculty, and staff to stand up with their lighters for Stanley Tookie Williams as an expression of sympathetic identification with really a first-degree murderer who co-founded the Crips, but through art, through, spoken word, through dance, through music, through narratives that brought the audience into the alternative perspective of these, people that they otherwise marginalize and don't know anything about. They were able to empathize and grow from that. So art is another, one of the tools that we need to deploy.
Great. Yeah, everything you said is basically right on. Okay, so now we have two questions that are kind of controversial, but let's go ahead and see. And you can answer no comment if you want to also. So I'm going to ask the last one first. Does the panel want to discuss the realities of Kamala Harris's iffy criminal justice history, as so many are glorifying her history as DA of California?
Oh yeah, I'll just jump in real quick. I have her in the prologue to my book. Right at the beginning of my book, I talk about two people who are representative of the problems that we're going to have with criminal justice reform. I say, one is one of the architects of mass incarceration, Joe Biden, 94 crime bill, before then, after then, as late as 2016, he was saying, I don't have any regrets about anything I did earlier. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who here in California, as we know, is talking about locking up parents for truant 16, 17-year-old kids, didn't prosecute any corrupt DAs as Attorney General, laughed when someone asked her about marijuana legalization at the time the Black community was bearing the brunt of legal, criminal justice in the marijuana context, right? So she definitely is not a progressive prosecutor, which she claimed to be in her memoir. She should have just owned that. I'm not a progressive prosecutor. I'm not Chesa Boudin. I never was Chesa Boudin. I'm not, Marilyn Mosby. I never was Marilyn Mosby. I've learned. Then was then. I was caught up in the time. I've learned. I'm going to grow and change. That's what you should have said. But no, I've always been a progressive prosecutor. And then your record just keeps looking you in the face and contradicting you, and it sounds silly, right? So that's what you should have done. But what we did here in LA was say that representational politics alone ain't enough. We aren't doing politics of pigmentation standing alone in LA. Jackie Lacey was a Black woman who put her social identity at the top of her campaign. Bullet point 1, I'm the first Black woman DA. Bullet point 2, I'm the first woman DA, right? She made that. She said, that's going to insulate me from any real criticism from the Black Lives Matter people. It didn't, because the Black Lives Matter folks were themselves Black women, for the most part. And they were saying, no, we're looking for substantive policies. We're not going to just play this game of social identity, trumps everything else. So I think there's a real growing sophistication among a lot of the electorate, Black electorate, non-Black electorate, when it comes to this kind of representational game that sometimes people play.
I wish that I could see more of what you are saying, because I was a very vocal critic of Kamala Harris's record as Attorney General and before her ascension, and based on not only the record, but my own personal experience with her as a civil rights attorney. And that I'm on record around that. What I have discovered, though, is that the representational issue has become paramount. It's been exploited, no question about it. And so the notion that young Black girls can look up to her as a representation of themselves and of what they can achieve, and the idea that she is now the vice president, and most people assume that she's going to be the president because that's American politics, right? These are challenges for us as progressives, because we understand that she is not and never was a progressive prosecutor. And you're absolutely right. The strategy would have been that. But, you know, Kamala was someone who locked up Black Lives Matter activists. Kamala was someone who completely rejected feminist movements in California. Now she is touted by the popular media and the establishment Democrats as the epitome of Black women. She has support amongst the Black community now because she represents the image of that. And so we have a lot of work to do to get people to look underneath that image, to look beyond that image, and to understand that there is a difference between Thurgood Marshall and Clarence Thomas. Hello.
Yes.
You know, that there is a difference between Jackie Lacey and Chesa Boudin. Hello. That there has to be, we have to recognize that all skin folk are not kinfolk. And being able we can only say that, right? We can only say that. And we got to keep saying that and keep saying it so that our folks get it, okay?
I think what it shows also is how little knowledge the majority of Black people have about some of our officials who have served in different positions. Those statistics don't come out. They don't hit the breakdown on the kind of role that Kamala played when she was DA or whatever. I mean, all you got to do is go back and look and see what her father said about her, who was a Marxist economist professor at Stanford. And he came out and said, all right, tell the truth. And then furthermore, you know, I was on the committee on the question of Palestine, the United Nations. I knew Edward Said. He's been shown hugging Netanyahu and whatever else. That a country which is more detrimental in its treatment. I went over to Palestine right after the Second Intifada, and I've never seen an apartheid situation like that anywhere in the world. A lot of our Black Americans don't understand that, and they will just accept certain things, this and whatever else. And I'm not talking about, you know, being anti-Semitic. I'm talking about, but I'm against pure Zionism of the highest degree. And that stuff's got to be exposed. If we claim to be the spokesperson and create a world that's going to benefit and create a society where all people can learn to live side by side, then let's get the facts straight and let's practice it.
And there's no question that Kamala is very much a profound and professed Zionist. She believes and supports the apartheid regime in Israel. We do not control the media. And the narrative that most Black people are getting and most white people in this country is coming from the media, which is, you know, given this flowery representation of who she is without actually balancing it. And it's unfortunate that, from my perspective, that she is a Black woman and that it is deceptive to our people, quite frankly.
Yeah, the corrupt corporate media is definitely a problem. And one of our town halls is called Media Justice. We were going to talk just about exactly that. One more question from Joaquin, our board member. Do you think defund the police is a good slogan? Either Dr. Armour or Pamela.
Hell yes. Hell yeah. And I'm so tired of the lecturing and policing of Black Lives Matter political messaging by people who haven't been on the front line making this movement happen since 2014, you know, out here in the streets getting kettled by police, getting beaten, you know, people like Melina Abdullah, you know, getting a tent outside the mayor's office and being on the street for 4 weeks in a row, you know, people hurling objects at her, and other Black Lives Matter activists making these sacrifices, and hearing all those same words. The same thing they're saying about don't say defund the police. They were saying about don't say Black Lives Matter. Have we already forgotten? I remember vividly, you know, oh, all lives matter. And then, you know, then it turned to blue lives matter. Then they showed that they weren't being sincere because, oh, if it was always all lives matter, then why are you now all of a sudden wrapping your arms around blue lives matter? Because it's never really about, you understood what Black Lives Matter meant. Black Lives Matter always meant Black Lives Matter also. Black Lives Matter, comma, T-O-O. There was an implied ellipsis that people, anybody who thought about it could get if they wanted to get it, but if you wanted to be obtuse about it, you could. And it's the same thing with defund the police. You know, defund the police, it's a compromise already going in between abolish the police and reform the police. It's already a compromise position, right? But that's not good enough. No, it makes people nervous. You can't say that, right? And by the way, here in LA, we had a defund the police initiative on the ballot. It was called Measure J. It was defund the police. It takes 10% of the LA County budget, and that's up to $1 billion a year, up to $10 billion a year budget. So 10% up to $1 billion a year that is going to non-incarceration alternatives. The voters put that in, Measure J. And when we were pushing that Measure J down here, it wasn't called the defund the police measure. I acknowledge that up front. But all of the rallying, all the messaging, the going door to door and knocking, they were wrapping their arms around defund the police. That was the messaging. And it prevailed at the ballot box. So so the gall of people who haven't been able to lead and this really most momentous movement of the last, how many, 40, 50 years? When has there been a movement like this? 40, 50 years, literally. You know, everybody was here over the summer. Everyone saw what we all experienced together, right? And that was made possible because of the organizing done by Black Lives Matter in 2014, 15, and 16. When the cameras went away, they kept building the infrastructure. They kept strengthening the sinews of connection. They were out in front of Jackie Lacey's office every Wednesday for 3 years, never rain or shine, right? And so you're going to tell them what slogans they need to use. You're going to lecture them. You're going to white-splain to them. You know how they should go about it. I'm just shocked. But I hear a lot of people saying that, and I'm always just a shock.
Yeah, we defunded the police when I was the mayor of Berkeley. It was right after Proposition 13 passed. We got the data though. We got a national organization, including McNamara at Stanford, the Criminal Justice Department, and other places, to show us what kind of data you needed. We had to look at when crime was the highest, like between midnight and 6 in the morning, and from 6 to 12, whatever else. So you needed fewer officers on at certain times. But you didn't need police on desk jobs either, because they get paid more because of the insurance they get and whatever else. We also looked at co-training for police and fire, because firemen most of the time just sit around sleeping until the fire happened, which very few people are. You need the data. And then we had to look at where crime was highest, where gentrification taking place, where there wasn't good schools, where there wasn't jobs, et cetera, whatever else. Know what you're talking about to inform the changes that need to be made. And that's what we got to do. But like somebody said, you got MSNBC, speak to the liberals, you got Fox, speak to the other side, just that. The corruption that's keeping us separated and making people look in between these things to get their decision maker is just terrible. And that's why we're 43rd in the world in literacy and education, 72nd in healthcare, and COVID-19 has really proven that. Look what they're talking about. I mean, I belong to the National Council of Elders. It was founded by Vincent Harding, who was Martin Luther King's speechwriter. And he had to be 65 or older. I'm 85. My granddaughter suggests I'm 4 years older in baseball, but things like that. But the fact is, you've got to have those facts and figures to inform and make something work. And those who think, I don't care how well educated you are, they got all the answers, go back and tell me what you got the answers for. Most of the time it's to perpetuate the status quo with the conditions that exist in these so-called United States of America.
Pamela, did you have any thoughts? Looks like you're muted.
Amen.
Yeah, me too. That's what I was thinking.
Amen.
So that was the last question from the audience. Wow, we went way over. Sorry, everyone. But this discussion was just too good. I didn't really care because I just wanted to capture everything. Matthew has one last question. I think after that, we're just going to go ahead and end it from there. Matthew, go ahead.
Sure. I guess I also wanted to ask this to Chesapeake, but I think Pamela Price would be still a good person to ask this of because for reasons I'll go into. So one thing that Chesa ran on that I really liked was he talked about not just like not prosecuting these crimes that shouldn't be prosecuted, but also going after crimes that like aren't necessarily prosecuted. And I think examples of what you can see of that are, violations of open meetings laws, like the Brown Act. I think there's never been prosecution for that in the entire history of the state, or, campaign finance laws that, where it's in theory a misdemeanor to violate them in California, but you don't see like super PACs that like violate disclosure rules in California, like the people running them prosecuted or anything. One other thing that like is like notoriously violated is the public in California is the Public Records Act request. Like as an example, I submitted a Public Records Act request, something about Janet Napolitano when she was UC president had done something, and they just would kept ignoring my records request for year after year until eventually she was no longer UC president, and there was no point. But what I realized was, for instance, Public Records Act request violations aren't actually, it's only a civil offense. It's not like a misdemeanor or an infraction. So what I was curious about was, do you think things like that, like the Brown Act or Public Records Act requests, should those types of things be, even as a regularly low level offense, should they be considered criminal offenses? Because then I can't sue to enforce them. I don't have any money, but a district attorney's office in theory has the resources and the money to go after those things. And I'd really like to hear particularly Pamela Price's answer, but everybody's answer, because both UC Berkeley and the UC Office of the President are in Alameda County. So your office would actually have a big influence, I think, on that. You're muted.
Yeah. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for the question. We know that part of the issue in the criminal justice system is who gets prosecuted, who gets targeted, and that there is a double standard. And so the resources of the carceral state have been focused on offenses by Black and Brown people in communities, and low-level offenses that police have discretion on that go to the district attorney's office. But public corruption is not one of those things that district attorneys have traditionally or even under any circumstances focused on. And certainly transparency is not a value that is part of our political process. To get information in the political realm as well as the financial realm, you have to go through so much information, so many hassles. And so it doesn't surprise me that we have a major institution like the state of California and the University of California that does not honor the Public Records Act and will not produce that information. The district attorney's office in Alameda County has a long and well-established history of not following Public Records Act and not being transparent. And one area that I'm particularly focused on is the issuance of reports following officer-involved shootings. Those reports are routinely issued 6, 8, 10 years later, or a year later is like lightning fast, but that's only if it's in collaboration with the police department. And so district attorney's office, though, do more and have more scope around the kinds of things that you're talking about. They have the tools and the resources to engage in the enforcement of, to address public corruption, to engage in the enforcement of the laws in a not just in the criminal justice system, but in collaboration with city attorneys and through the use of civil statutes. Environmental activities are things that the DA's office is supposed to be monitoring. And so those, I don't agree necessarily that the kinds of violations that you're talking about should be criminalized, because I'm not trying to expand the carceral state, but I do recognize that the district attorney has an important role to play when we're talking about transparency, both in local government as well as state government. And DAs take positions all the time. As Chesa pointed out, through the California District Attorneys Association, they are regularly taking positions that are opposed to people being able to get information. That's why it was so impactful for us to have SB 1421 when police officer information was now able to be disclosed. So I can see a progressive district attorneys alliance taking up the kinds of issues that you're bringing up, which are important. It's only through that transparency that we do actually have public accountability. So thank you.
All right, and with that, we had taken our last question. So we're basically done with the very first Justice Town Hall series on criminal justice. I want to thank all of our speakers. They were wonderful. Dr. Ware, Dr. Armour, Pamela, and Chesa, and our Q&A panelists that asked wonderful questions, and our audience that asked some really incisive questions. So incisive that we went over by 45 minutes. So that turned out really good. So I wanted to invite everyone watching to join us. Our Revolution East Bay, here's our information, ourrevolutioneastbay.org, and you can email us, and to join the Coalition for Police Accountability. There's their website, and their email address is Kathy's email, Kathy Leonard, kathy.leonard3@gmail.com. And Kathy, did you have any final words you wanted to toss out?
Yes, so I would encourage everyone to check out our website and follow us. You can email me for more information at kathy.leonard3@gmail.com and find out what our latest project is. We put Measure LL to bed, Measure S1, and we've got something coming up. So the work of the Coalition for Police Accountability to hold Oakland Police Department accountable is not over. And we will continue that fight. So join us. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, definitely hook up with CPA if you're in the East Bay area. They're doing some phenomenal work. Just the Oakland Police Commission is very stunning. Like somebody from Texas that looking at it, and I was just like stunned at how well it works. And then they added some extra enforcement this year with S1, which is great. All right, so that's actually it for the town hall.
Oh, can I make one?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I wanted to make one comment. I'm just reflecting back on what someone was, there was a request about police accountability, accountability is getting late, measures for Alameda County. And that's something that maybe the coalition may be looking at too, among other things that we're doing. So stay tuned, check out our Facebook page, email us, and let you know what's going on. Maybe you can join the efforts and help us out. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Kathy. And yeah, this stream is actually going to be put on Facebook and YouTube. So everyone watching, don't forget to share the stream with everyone. And for everyone that missed it, you should tell them, hey, it was a really good town hall. You should check it out. So that's it for today. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and stop recording.